The Korean War, which spanned from June 25, 1950 to July 27, 1953, was a pivotal conflict during the Cold War, deeply influencing the political and military landscape of East Asia. At the end of World War II in 1945, Korea, which had been under Japanese control, was liberated. However, the post-war power struggle led to the division of Korea into two zones of occupation. The Soviet Union controlled the north, while the United States occupied the south. This division, primarily along the 38th parallel, set the stage for the intense and brutal conflict that would follow. By 1948, Korea was officially divided into two separate states. The north, under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, adopted a communist system, while the south, led by Syngman Rhee, established a capitalist government with U.S. support. The Soviets withdrew their forces from North Korea in 1948, and the U.S. withdrew its troops from the South in 1949. Despite the withdrawal of foreign forces, tensions between the North and South remained high, and neither side was willing to accept the 38th parallel as a permanent border. Both Korea's leaderships viewed the division as temporary, and the prospect of reunification under their respective ideologies remained an underlying goal. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean People's Army, KPA, numbering about 75,000 troops, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea, crossing the 38th parallel. The North Korean forces swiftly advanced, overwhelming the Republic of Korea's South Korean army. Within days, they captured Seoul, the South Korean capital, and occupied nearly all of South Korea, except for the southernmost city of Busan. This rapid advance alarmed the international community, particularly the United States, as it signified the spread of communism in Asia, a scenario the U.S. sought to prevent. The fear was that the fall of Korea would trigger a domino effect, leading to the spread of communism to neighboring countries in Asia. South Korea, desperate for help, appealed to the international community for assistance. In response, the United States, under President Harry Truman, pushed for a resolution in the United Nations Security Council, seeking to condemn North Korea's actions and provide military support to the South. At this time, the Soviet Union was boycotting the Security Council, as the UN had not recognized the People's Republic of China, the communist government, and instead recognized the Republic of China, Taiwan, as the legitimate representative of China. Without the Soviet veto, the UN Security Council passed a resolution to form a military intervention force to support South Korea. The result was the formation of a UN command, with U.S. General Douglas MacArthur appointed as its commander. The UN forces, predominantly made up of American troops, arrived in South Korea in early July 1950, but they were soon pushed back by the North Korean army. The UN forces formed a defensive perimeter around Busan, holding the line until reinforcements arrived. By August, the UN forces had been strengthened, and MacArthur launched a bold counteroffensive. On September 15, 1950, the U.S. Marines, supported by other UN-TAF forces, executed a daring amphibious landing at Incheon, a port city near Seoul. This surprise attack caused the North Korean forces to retreat rapidly. By the end of September, the UN troops had recaptured Seoul and liberated the majority of South Korea. At this point, MacArthur's objectives shifted from merely containing the North Korean threat to pursuing the defeat of North Korea entirely. Despite concerns from President Truman about provoking Chinese intervention, MacArthur was given the green light to push into North Korea. On October 7, 1950, UN forces crossed the 38th parallel and advanced toward Pyongyang, the North Korean capital. By October 12th, UN forces had captured Pyongyang and were approaching the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China. The Chinese government, led by Mao Zedong, viewed the UN forces' advance as a direct threat to its national security. In response, China mobilized its military and sent a massive force of about 250,000 troops to support North Korea. This intervention by China marked a major turning point in the war. The newly arrived Chinese forces, combined with the North Korean army, were able to push the UN forces back. By January 1951, the Chinese and North Korean forces had recaptured Seoul, and the front lines had been pushed southward. The war now took on a more protracted nature as the UN forces, now bolstered by reinforcements, began pushing back again. General MacArthur, frustrated with the slow progress, proposed using atomic bombs on Chinese forces, but this suggestion was rejected by President Truman. MacArthur's aggressive stance led to a serious clash with Truman, who had adopted a more cautious policy. In April 1951, MacArthur was dismissed by Truman for insubordination, and the UN command was placed under new leadership. The policy now shifted back to containment rather than pursuing total victory. In June 1951, the war reached a stalemate. The front lines had stabilized around the 38th parallel, and both sides entrenched themselves in a bloody, grinding conflict that would last for another 2 years. During this period, peace talks began in July 1951, but no compromise could be reached. Meanwhile, the fighting continued, with American pilots engaging in combat against Soviet pilots flying Chinese jet fighters, further complicating the war. In early 1953, General Dwight D. Eisenhower assumed the U.S. presidency, promising to bring the war to a close. Eisenhower's leadership and diplomatic efforts, along with the strain of prolonged conflict, finally led to a breakthrough. After 2 years of negotiations, an armistice agreement was signed on July 27, 1953, at Panmunjom, a village located on the 38th parallel. The armistice established a ceasefire and created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, a buffer zone separating North and South Korea, which remains in place to this day. While the armistice officially ended the fighting, the Korean War did not result in a formal peace treaty. The war's conclusion solidified the division of Korea into 2 separate nations, with the North remaining under communist rule and the South adopting a capitalist system. The Korean War left lasting scars on both sides, with millions of casualties, including civilians, and widespread destruction across the Korean peninsula. It also intensified the Cold War as the United States and the Soviet Union, along with their respective allies, continued to vie for influence in the region. In conclusion, the Korean War was a brutal and complex conflict that had far-reaching consequences for Korea, the United States, China, and the broader global balance of power. The war not only solidified the division of Korea, but also set the stage for decades of military tension between North and South Korea, which continues to this day. The Korean War was a key moment in the Cold War, and its legacy still shapes the geopolitical landscape of East Asia. Despite the armistice, the Korean peninsula remains divided, and the conflict serves as a reminder of the enduring tensions that can arise from ideological divides and the consequences of global power struggles.